Okay, so now you've got your plan. Now you need to actually get a job. How can you do that? That's what this section's about. I've got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that most advice on this topic sucks. The good news is that there's not much advice to tell you, so this section is going to be short. Getting a job is kind of like a sales process. You start by getting leads, then you convert those leads into offers, and then at the end you negotiate. And in this talk I'm just going to summarize all the best advice we found on how to actually get jobs, and then lead you through these stages and say what you should do at each stage. So firstly, how to get leads. First thing you need to know about leads is that you need to get a lot of them. It depends on your chances of success, but maybe think of something like aiming to get 10 to 100 leads. Getting rejected 20 times in a row is normal, so you need to be prepared for that. Okay, so now how to actually get leads. Now the first thing is lots of graduate positions are just advertised and have a highly standardized recruitment process. This is things like consulting, the fast stream civil service, some teaching jobs. In these cases, you just have to apply to them. Go to the website, look at jobs listings, make applications, and then go through the standard steps. But then what happens when you've used up all of those kind of standard options? This is where many people dry up. The idea that most obviously comes to mind is just sending out your CV to lots of people by email. The problem with this is that it only has a success rate of a couple of %. So what to do instead? The key principle here is to use the methods that employers most like to receive applications by and that have the highest chances of success. And this is basically referrals. A referral is someone introducing you to the employer and saying you should consider hiring this person. Referrals are the preferred way for many companies to hire, since it's the most reliable for them. If someone comes to them through a referral, they're much more likely to be a good applicant than if they've just received a CV by email. Many companies get hundreds of these. Moreover, around 50% of jobs are found through connections and never advertised. So if you don't pursue this method, then you'll miss out on about half of jobs. And that often includes some of the best ones. Okay, so how do you actually get referrals in the first place? Here's a couple of ways. The first is that when you're doing your job search, ask everyone you know if they know of any of openings of the kind that you're looking for. They might know something that you haven't come across already, so it helps you find leads, and they might refer you to the employer. If you think they might, then just quickly ask them, would you mind introducing me to this person who works there? Okay, so then another thing is if there's a specific organization you want to work for, then consider what you basically need to find is someone you know who knows someone at that organization, and then ask them to introduce you to someone in the organization. LinkedIn can be a really useful tool here. Find the organization you want to work for, find the LinkedIn profiles of some people who work at that organization, and then it shows you how you're connected to that person. The key is to find a linking person, someone who knows you and also knows the person who works in that company to introduce you. Just say that you want to talk about what it's like working at that company because you're really interested in working there. And then those conversations can be really useful for finding out about the job, and they can also lead to referrals. Another path is that your university careers service can probably help. Many services have a list of alumni in lots of different careers who are happy to advise current undergraduates on their careers. And again, those conversations could lead to more leads and introductions. And then finally, there's lots of people in our community, the 80,000 Hours community, who are happy to give advice on their career area and help you make applications. To find those people, go to the 80,000 Hours LinkedIn group and ask for help. Okay, so that's how to get leads. How to actually convert leads into job offers. The key idea here is to think about things from the employer's point of view. What the employer basically wants is confidence that you can do something useful in that organization. How do you do that? Sometimes the recruitment process is highly standardized, as we've already mentioned. In that case, there's not that much you can do except for go through the steps. But many employers, the process is much more informal, and it's more about persuading a couple of key people that you're worth hiring. One stage is getting introduced via referral, as we just mentioned in the last talk. This is a much better signal to the employer than just getting a CV. Another situation is that maybe you've just done some very similar work in the past, and in that case, then you can just explain that to them. I've done these things which are very similar, I was successful, and then convince them that way. But most people in the audience probably aren't in that situation. You're going to be applying for things that you've never done before. So then in those cases, how do you convince the employer that you can do something useful? And the basic idea here is to do free work. So the idea is the most convincing way to persuade someone that you can do the work is actually just to do a little bit of the work. So here's some more concrete examples about how you could do that. One is called the pre-interview project. This means finding out exactly what the job involves and then trying to find out some of the challenges that you'd be working on in that kind of role. Figure out, maybe spend a weekend coming up with some ways that you might be able to solve those problems and then send it to the employer. A recent example was an applicant to 80,000 Hours who was going to be working as a product engineer on the website. They thought there were some problems with the design of our career quiz. So they actually built a new version of the quiz and then sent it to us. And that immediately put them in the top 20% of applicants to me. Another example is there was someone who wanted to work for Airbnb. So what they did was get a group of friends, make them go through the booking process, and see what they were confused by on the way. And they made up a list of the most common problems people had while signing up, and then some suggestions for how they would deal with those problems. Again, they then sent this to Airbnb, and then this led to them getting an interview and then a job. A similar thing, coined by Ramit Sethi, love him or hate him figure, it's called the briefcase technique. And the idea here is that when you go to the interview, you bring out a couple of page document where you've listed, here are some of the 3 key problems I think I would be facing in this role and you're facing as an employer. This is how I would solve these problems if I was in the role. Final technique, if someone is on the fence, then one option is to offer to do free work. So suppose they're very tempted to hire you but just not quite sure. Then you could say, how about I work for you for free for a month or a couple of weeks, and if you're happy at the end, then make me an offer. And the reason this works is just taking all the risk out of it for the employer. I can say that any of these would totally work on me. I've overseen several years of quite a competitive application process at 80,000 Hours and also our sister charities within the Centre for Effective Altruism. And any of these techniques would immediately put you in the top 20% of applicants. Many people who are applying to a job don't even really know what problems they would be working on. So even just doing that puts you ahead. And then some even half plausible solutions that you might propose, again, can be really convincing. Okay, and then the final stage, once you've got offers, then what? Then comes negotiation. And the key message of this section is just to actually consider negotiating. Most people are so happy once they get an offer, they don't ever consider negotiating at that point. And it's true that it depends a bit on the context. If you've just landed a very competitive option with a highly standardized process, like Teach First or the Civil Service Fast Stream, then negotiation is inappropriate. Your manager won't even be able to offer you a different salary because it's all a fixed scale. But in many jobs, negotiation is completely possible. It's especially worth considering if you have already 2 offers, or you're confident that you can get a second. In that case, go to your top choice and say you'd prefer to work for them, but this other person has made this offer to you. Can they match it? In many situations, a few hours of negotiation could easily get you a 10% higher salary. And this is because hiring people is quite a painful process for the employer. Once you've settled on hiring someone, you're probably not going to want to let that person go for just a 5 or 10% difference in salary. But that actually means that couple of hours spent negotiating could be worth thousands and thousands of dollars to you, or thousands and thousands of pounds, over the next couple of years. And if you're smart, you'll remember what we discussed in the first talk, and you won't negotiate for higher salary necessarily, but rather something that will make a bigger difference to your job satisfaction, such as the option to work at home 1 day a week. Or perhaps a particularly good option, negotiate to be able to develop certain skills in the role, which can help you build better career capital, and may even be seen as a positive by the employer, because it shows that you're taking your personal development seriously. And then finally with negotiation, also remember that you can do it during the job. Try to perform as well as you can in your first year, and then at that point negotiate. Okay, so how to actually negotiate? There's lots of books on this. A pretty good one is called Getting Past No by William Ury, who created the Harvard Law negotiation course. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how it's really important to get introduced to jobs and to get referrals if you want to find a job. How can you actually get in a position where you can get referred? And to do this, you have to network, which is a big thing that people talk about in careers advice. Now, networking often seems like a very slimy process or a very vague process. What are you actually supposed to do if you want to network? My answer is that networking basically just involves meeting people you like and then finding small ways to help them out. The idea is you just meet lots of people, then you're on good terms with them, they're inclined to want to help you out in the future because you've helped them, and then they're willing to do things like introduce you to an employer. The best way to do this is just to help people with no particular expectation of return. This is what the best networkers generally do, and there's evidence that this mindset is associated with the best results, as we talked about in the very first lecture, and the book Give and Take is all about this topic. Okay, how do you actually do the first step? How do you meet people? Well, the best way to meet people is again through referrals. Find people you want to meet and then find someone who knows that person, who you also know, a linking person, and ask them to introduce you to them. And then you can just keep going like that. So for instance, if you meet one person in an industry you're interested in and make a good impression, then you can ask them, who else should I speak to find out about this? And then ask for more introductions. And of course, you can also get involved with projects and groups where there's lots of people you'd like to meet. Don't make the mistake of going to networking events where you're not keen on meeting those people and find it awkward and so on. That's not actually the best way to network. And then you can find many more practical tips in this book. It's the best one we've managed to find on how to network so far. It's got a slightly annoying, grating American tone, but I think the underlying ideas are good, and it's the best guide we've found, and full of lots of practical tips on how to do the previous two steps. Okay, and then the last thing is motivation. For many of you, the job search, finding a job, will be one of the hardest things you've ever done. You probably haven't done something before where you've been rejected 20 times in a row, but that's actually the norm in finding and applying to jobs. And you have to carry that out without any support that you might have had, say, when you were applying to university. And this means you should throw every motivational technique at the job search you know. A good book on this, there's lots of books on motivation, is The Motivation Hacker by Nick Winter. Short, engaging, filled with lots of practical tips. Throw all of those things at it so that you're ready for the eventuality where you've been going for months and still had rejection after rejection. Okay, so a quick summary of this section. Firstly, generate leads by using connections. Secondly, convert those leads by doing free work. Negotiation, actually consider doing it. And then to network, meet people, then help them. And then finally, do whatever it takes to motivate yourself. Getting a job can be an unpleasant process, but if you do these steps, you'll give yourself the best chance for success. And then finally, a one-page summary of the whole day. So, to have a fulfilling career, do what's valuable, do what contributes. Start by focusing on exploring your options, then focusing on building flexible career capital, then solving pressing social problems to actually do what contributes. And then within there, you've got the best causes, the best methods, and personal fit. And then adapting your plan over time. I think if you do all this and put some of the time in, then you can have a far more satisfying and high-impact career than you would have had otherwise. Thank you.